My friends, let us come together for a moment of quietness, not the quietness achieved by will, not the quietness that we try to force, but the quietness that arises naturally when we turn inward. For it is only in this inner stillness that the deepest truths may reveal themselves. Today we turn our attention to two simple words, two words spoken by the Master, repeated across centuries, echoed in Scripture, heard in temples and churches, whispered in the solitude of seekers everywhere, yet rarely understood. These words are not phrases to be memorized. They are not a formula, nor a technique, nor a mystical password. They are the doorway to the inner temple of your being. They are the announcement of the presence that has been with you from the beginning. They are the foundation upon which all spiritual realization rests. The words are simply, I am, when Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He was not speaking of a man. He was not pointing to a personal self. He was revealing the nature of the presence that animated him, lived through him, and healed through him. It is this very presence that has been hidden behind the veil of personal identity, misunderstood as human ego, and lost in centuries of theological interpretation. But as we gather in consciousness now, we set aside all interpretations, all inherited beliefs, all preconceived ideas. We come not to learn about the I am, but to discern its activity as the essence of our own being. For you see, the I am is not a name. It is not a statement of human personality. It is the infinite announcing itself. It is the divine self revealing its nature. Every time the Master spoke those words, he was opening the curtain and allowing us to behold the eternal truth, that God is the I of you and the I of me. Let us linger here, gently, for this is not something to be rushed. If we hurry past these words, we lose their power. But if we let them settle into awareness quietly, silently, they begin to awaken something long asleep within us. I am, not the human I, not the personal I, but the eternal I that was before Abraham was, the I that is one with the Father, the I that needs no defense, no protection, no improvement, no strengthening in the spiritual life. Everything begins here. And without this recognition, no amount of prayer, study, or effort can bring about the transformation the soul longs for. We have spent many lifetimes searching for God outside ourselves, searching in holy places, in rituals, in people, in doctrines, in words, never realizing that the one we seek has been quietly declaring its identity within us all along. This, my friends, is why the Master spoke so plainly, so directly, so simply. I am. These two words contain the essence of all mystical revelation. They reveal the indwelling presence. They expose the unity of God and man. They dissolve the separation that has caused fear, lack, struggle, and suffering. They carry the entire weight of spiritual healing, spiritual supply, spiritual protection, and spiritual authority. If you will sit with these two words, not as affirmations, not as positive statements, not as mental attempts to reshape life, but as the gentle recognition of what eternally is, you will begin to see that the inner temple is already open. There is no door to unlock. There is no distance to travel. There is only the unveiling of what has forever been true, that the I of your being is God. Let us enter this exploration together, not as students seeking knowledge, but as living expressions of the very presence these words reveal. And as we move forward, let us remember The purpose of this teaching is not to change the outer world, but to awaken the truth of identity. And in that awakening, all that needs to be transformed is transformed of its own accord. Now, having opened the doorway with these words, we will proceed to the next stage of our journey. Let us move a little deeper now, gently, without strain, without rushing the mind. The truth of these teachings unfolds only to the degree that we are willing to listen, not with the ears, but with the heart, not with thought, but with awareness. When the Master uttered the words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he was not elevating a human personality. He was not drawing attention to a man, nor inviting worship of a figure. How easily we miss this. How easily we listen with the human sense, and so believe that the statement points to a person, to something separate, remote, unattainable. But in the silence of spiritual discernment, the meaning changes. You begin to realize that the Master spoke from the standpoint of the divine presence, the spiritual I, the universal Christ. He was not speaking about himself. He was speaking as the self that is one with God, the self that is the life of every individual, the self that cannot be confined to a single form, a single name, a single moment in history. You see, my friends, Jesus never claimed divinity for a person. He revealed divinity as a presence. And unless this is understood, we remain caught in the belief that God was present only in him and therefore absent in us. This is the great misunderstanding that has darkened much of spiritual history. Let us look carefully at what the Master said. "I am the light of the world." If these words referred to a single human personality, they would perish with the body. Yet the light did not perish. It continued to illuminate hearts across centuries. It awakened saints and mystics in every tradition. It radiated beyond time and place. Why? Because the I of that statement was not the personal Jesus, it was the Christ presence, the divine selfhood that is the light of every soul. The I that spoke through Jesus is the same I that speaks through you when you rest in spiritual awareness. You might be asking, how can this be? How can the I that animated the Master be the I of my own being? The answer is not found in reasoning. The answer comes through inner recognition, the same recognition that dawned upon Peter when he said, "Thou art the Christ." He was not identifying a man, he was perceiving the divine identity shining through the form. The Church has often taken this recognition and enclosed it around a single figure, as though the Christ were limited to one appearance. But the mystical traditions, the spiritual seers, and indeed the Master himself, taught something far greater. The Christ is not a person, the Christ is a presence. The Christ is the spiritual I am of all being, and so when Jesus spoke the words, "I am the resurrection," he revealed a principle, not an event, not a ritual, not a doctrine, but a principle available to the whole of mankind. The resurrection he spoke of was the rising of consciousness from the human sense of self into the recognition of the divine self. And this rising is possible for anyone who turns inward and listens for the presence. Do you see now why these words are so often misunderstood? We have read them with the human mind, which sees separation, hierarchy, distance. But when read with the spiritual mind, with the inner eye, they reveal unity, oneness, the universal life that is the true identity of every individual. This is the point at which the teaching moves from admiration to realization. It is one thing to admire Jesus. It is another to understand the consciousness from which he spoke. For in that understanding, the same consciousness begins to awaken within you, not as an imitation, not as a striving, but as a quiet recognition of what has always been true. So let us hold this clarification gently but firmly. When Jesus said, "I am," he spoke not as a man about himself. He spoke as the divine presence, announcing its nature. He spoke as the universal I am, which is the life of all. And the moment you hear these words as the voice of your own true self, the scriptures open, the heart opens, the inner temple opens, and you begin to walk a path not of belief, but of realization. We will, in our next section, look more deeply at how the human sense of I hides the divine I am, and how this mistaken identity becomes the root of all suffering. Now, let us turn inward once more, for we are approaching the central turning point of spiritual unfoldment. In truth, the entire structure of suffering rests upon a single misunderstanding, one so subtle, so deeply ingrained, that humanity has rarely questioned it. Yet the moment this misunderstanding is corrected, the cords of suffering begin to loosen, and the light of spiritual freedom makes itself known. The misunderstanding is simply this: we have mistaken the human I for the divine I am. We have taken the sacred word I, the very name of God, and applied it to the body, the emotions, the thoughts, the conditions of human existence. And in this unconscious act, we bind ourselves to limitation because we believe that the I which appears to suffer is the true self. Each time we say, "I am sick, I am afraid, I am lonely, I am failing," we attach the holiness of the divine I to a temporary appearance. We unite the limitless with the limited, and in that fusion arises confusion. Now, the infinite cannot truly be limited, but we can believe it is. And that belief becomes the fabric of human experience. For the Master taught, and Goldsmith reminded us, that experience conforms to identity. As a man thinketh in his heart who he is, so is his experience shaped. Let us look gently, quietly, at how this confusion operates. A feeling arises, perhaps fear. Immediately the unawakened mind says, "I am afraid." But who is this I? Is it the body? Is it the passing emotion? Is it the conditioned mind? Or is it the divine presence that is the same yesterday, today, and forever? Can the infinite be afraid? Can the I that Jesus spoke of be threatened? Can the eternal suffer the fluctuation of moods? You see, it is not the fear itself that binds us, it is the false identification with it. The fear passes quickly if not claimed, but once we attach the sacred I to it, we breathe life into it, we make it part of our sense of self, and thus we prolong it. The same is true of illness. The body may present symptoms, that is the nature of form, but the mistake, the real illness, is the thought, "I am sick." The I that you truly are cannot be sick. It cannot deteriorate. It cannot be harmed. It cannot lack vitality, for it is the infinite life that animates all. This is why the Master spoke from the standpoint of the divine I am. He never said, "I am weak, I am uncertain, I am troubled." He spoke only from the truth of identity, and from that truth flowed the harmonies of healing and restoration. My friends, all suffering comes from believing that the human sense of I, the personal, limited, changeable I, is your true identity. This false sense of self is the only thing that can fear, the only thing that can lack, the only thing that can be wounded or offended. When you identify with it, you live in its bondage. When you withdraw identification from it, you discover that the divine I am has been yourself all along. The entire spiritual path, as Goldsmith taught, is not a journey of improving the human self. It is the recognition that the human self was never you. The I of you is the same I that spoke through the prophets, the mystics, the seers, the sages, and the Master himself. The moment this becomes clear, not intellectually, but inwardly, suffering begins to dissolve. Not because we fight it, not because we resist it, not because we use spiritual power to overcome it, but because the one who suffered is no longer believed to be the self. As long as you believe you are the human I, you will experience the limitations of that identity. But when you recognize the divine I am as yourself, you enter into the freedom of the sons of God, where harmony, peace, and supply unfold naturally, without effort. We will move, in our next section, into the deeper work of learning how to hear these I am statements with spiritual ears, so that the truth behind them reveals itself directly within your own consciousness. Let us settle even more deeply into the silence within, for this next movement in our unfolding is not an intellectual one. It is the beginning of an inner transformation, a shift from hearing with the outer senses to perceiving with the spiritual faculties of the soul. And this shift is necessary because the words of the Master cannot be understood at the level of human thought. When we listen with the human mind, we hear language. When we listen with the spiritual ear, we hear revelation. The Master said, "He that hath ears to hear, let him hear." He was not speaking of physical ears. He was inviting the listener into a dimension of awareness where truth is discerned not by reason, not by emotion, not by intellect, but by a deeper knowing and inner recognition of the presence. When Jesus declared, "I am the resurrection," the human mind hears a statement of religious significance, a phrase to be believed or rejected. But the spiritual ear hears something altogether different. It hears the voice of the infinite announcing its nature. I am is the rising of life out of limitation, out of despair, out of fear. I am is the eternal, ever-present activity of God expressed in and as individual being. In this way, the scriptures cease to be ancient words. They become a living presence, speaking directly to your consciousness. You discover that you are not reading truth, you are being addressed by truth. Let us take another example. When the Master said, "I am the light of the world," the human mind interprets this as a title. Jesus is the light, but the spiritual ear recognizes that the light he spoke of was not personal. It was the divine light, the universal Christ, shining through him, radiating as him, and available to radiate as you. This is why Goldsmith taught that the Bible must be read, not historically, but spiritually. If we read it as history, we are inspired but unchanged. If we read it as revelation, it awakens the truth of our own identity. Now let us practice this inwardly. Let us take the statement, "I am the way." Close your eyes inwardly, not physically, but in awareness, and hear the words again, slowly. I am the way. Do not hear them as though spoken by another. Do not hear them as though they came from outside. Let them arise within you, from the depth of your own being. Let the I that speaks be the I that lives you, breathes you, sustains you, Notice what happens. The words begin to gently detach from the personality of Jesus and reveal themselves as universal truth. You begin to sense that the same presence that walked the hills of Galilee speaks within your own consciousness at this very moment. You see, the spiritual ear hears truth impersonally. It hears the universal, not the personal. And in this shift, the teaching stops being something you admire and becomes something you embody. This is why Goldsmith emphasized again and again, truth is not in the words. Truth is in the consciousness behind the words. The words are but symbols. They point, but they are not the reality itself. And so our task is not to memorize scripture, but to cultivate the inner stillness in which the living truth reveals itself. When you hear "I am" with the spiritual ear, you no longer hear a doctrine or a command. You hear the divine self announcing its presence. You hear the truth of your own being speaking to itself. And this recognition becomes the foundation upon which spiritual healing, spiritual supply, and spiritual harmony naturally unfold. You do not try to make these things happen. You do not use truth as a power. You simply recognize the I that is already whole, already complete, already one with God. And so I invite you, in the quiet moments of your day, not in formal meditation alone, but throughout ordinary activities, to listen inwardly for this "I am," not as a sound, not as a voice, but as a gentle awareness that transcends the thoughts that pass before it. It is there, always present, always available, always whispering. Its identity, as you listen, the shift begins. You cease hearing the words of Scripture with the mind. You begin hearing them with the soul. And when the soul hears, it recognizes its own nature. In our next movement, we will look at the great error that arises when people try to use these holy words as techniques or tools, and why the "I am" can never be employed by the human self, but only revealed by divine grace. Now, my friends, let us move with gentleness into a matter of great importance, one that has confused seekers for centuries and continues to do so in our time. It is the tendency, almost universal in human consciousness, to take spiritual truth and attempt to use it, to take the holy and employ it for human advantage, to take the divine name and wield it as a personal tool. And this, more than anything else, is the cause of spiritual disappointment. You see, the sacred words "I am" were never given as a technique. They were never intended to be used by the human mind to accomplish human ends. They were revealed as truth, not as a device. They are a recognition, not a power to manipulate. In fact, the very moment the human self tries to use the "I am," it loses all access to its real meaning. Goldsmith made this clear again and again. Truth is not a power to use. Truth is a presence to behold. Let us pause and feel the weight of that. Truth is not a power to use. It is a presence to behold. And there is a world of difference between the two. When the personal self says, "I will use "I am" to attract health, to draw abundance, to manifest success," it has already missed the essence of the teaching. Why? Because it assumes that the human mind stands outside the divine and can call upon it like a servant. It assumes that the human being can reach into the infinite and pull forth blessings at will. But the spiritual principle is the exact opposite. The human self can do nothing. It can accomplish nothing. It cannot initiate divine activity. It cannot command God. All power is of God, said the Master, not of man, and the I am is God. So when we try to use the I am to change conditions, we are attempting to employ God as a personal instrument, and this always fails because it is built on a faulty premise, the premise that there are two selves, a little self who needs something and a divine self who can give it. There are not two, there is only one. The I am is the only self. Consider for a moment the wind. You cannot push the wind. You cannot pull the wind. You cannot command the wind. But you may stand still enough to feel its movement, and in that stillness you discover that its motion becomes your motion effortlessly. So it is with the I am. It cannot be grasped by the mind. It cannot be used as a tool. It can only be recognized. That is why any attempt to affirm, I am strong, I am wealthy, I am healed, is ultimately rooted in a misunderstanding. It is the human self trying to cloak itself in divine language. It is the personal ego painting spiritual colors upon itself, yet remaining unchanged underneath. Goldsmith would remind his students, you cannot make truth true by affirming it. Truth is already true. God is already the I of your being. Supply is already infinite. Life is already indestructible. Love is already the essence of your nature. The role of the seeker, then, is not to use truth, but to witness it, not to employ the I am, but to yield to it, not to manipulate, but to surrender. When you stop trying to use God, you begin to feel God. When you stop trying to make the I am produce results, the presence reveals itself. When you cease striving, you discover that grace has been operating all along. Let us take a moment here, a moment of silent humility. Let us acknowledge that the human self has no power. Let us release any urge to control, to direct, to compel, and let us rest in the knowing the I am is the only power. The I am is the only presence. The I am is the only self. From this recognition, not from effort, harmony flows. From this recognition, supply appears. From this recognition, health is revealed. From this recognition, peace becomes the atmosphere of our being. And now, having understood why the I am cannot be used as a technique, we are ready to enter the deeper mystery of identity, the realization that spiritual healing is never the result of fixing the human self, but of revealing the divine self that has always been present. That is the next step in our journey. Let us go forward now, slowly, quietly, for we are entering the heart of the spiritual message that Jesus lived and that the infinite way reveals. This is not a teaching about changing conditions. It is not a message about altering the body or rearranging the outer world. It is a message about identity, about who and what you truly are. Every healing that ever took place in the presence of the Master, every restoration, every release, every lifting of the veil was the result of one thing, a shift of identity, not a shift in the body, not a shift in circumstances, a shift in the center of consciousness from the human I to the divine I am. This is why the Master could heal without effort, without ritual, without technique. He saw no suffering individual to be repaired. He saw only the truth of identity, the presence of God appearing as individual being. He saw only the I am. And in the presence of that recognition, the appearance of illness or lack or fear simply dissolved for want of reality. Goldsmith described this with great simplicity. No one needs healing. They need the realization of their true identity. Sit with this. Let it sink into the heart. We are not trying to fix the outer picture. We are awakening to the truth that the picture never described, the self. Consider the woman who suffered from chronic pain. She came seeking healing, believing that something in her body had to be changed. She had tried everything, medicine, prayer, effort, and nothing had altered the condition. But when she sat in the silence with the truth that the I of her being was God, that the divine I am was the essence of her life, something subtle began to shift. She saw, perhaps for the first time, that the pain belonged to a sense of self that was never her true identity. The body may have had symptoms, yes, but the I that she truly was, the I that lived her, the I that knew her, the I that sustained her, remained untouched, uninjured, whole. And as that recognition deepened, the suffering began to fade, not because she battled it, not because she affirmed over it, but because she no longer identified herself with the one who suffered. She rested in the truth that the I am cannot be in pain, and the illusion could no longer hold. The same principle applies to supply. There was a man whose business seemed on the brink of collapse. His fear was great, for he believed his identity was tied to the business, tied to the success or failure of outer conditions. He prayed desperately for God to intervene, but nothing changed because he was praying from a false premise, the premise that supply comes from outside and that he was separate from the source. When he encountered the teaching of the I am, he discovered something revolutionary. God is not the giver of supply. God is the I of your being, and that I is infinite supply itself. The moment he recognized this, not as theory, but as felt truth, fear loosened its grip. He stopped praying for supply and began resting in the truth that supply is an activity of consciousness, not a condition of matter. Slowly, opportunities opened, ideas flowed, and the outer form rearranged itself to express the inner recognition. You see, the outward change is always the last part of healing. The first part is identity. All fear, all disease, all lack, all loneliness, every discord of human experience arises because we identify ourselves as a separate, struggling, finite creature, separate from God, separate from wholeness, separate from the I that Jesus revealed. As long as this false identity stands, suffering must follow it like a shadow. But the moment we recognize even faintly that the I of our being is God, that the I am is the only self, the shadow begins to disappear, not because we fight it, but because we have turned toward the light. Spiritual healing, then, is not a battle. It is not a project. It is not a matter of using God to fix the human condition. It is the quiet realization that the human condition never described your true self. The I am has never been sick. The I am has never lacked. The I am has never feared. The I am has never been alone. And the more we rest in this realization, not with strain, not with effort, but with deep humility, the more harmony flows of its own accord. Grace reveals itself not as something given, but as the nature of the I that you are. Now that we understand this shift of identity, We are ready to explore the conscious practice that makes this realization a living experience, the sacred practice known as practicing the presence. This will be the next step in our unfolding. Let us move now into the living core of the spiritual life, the practice that transforms the truth we have heard into the truth we experience. For it is not enough to understand with the mind that the I am is our identity. It is not enough to agree with the principle, to admire it, or even to believe it. The realization must become an activity of consciousness. It must be lived, breathed, rested in, moment by moment. This is what the Master meant when he spoke of abiding. This is what Goldsmith called practicing the presence. Now, practicing the presence is not a discipline in the human sense. It is not something we force, nor something we accomplish. It is not striving for spiritual attainment. It is the gentle turning of consciousness toward the awareness of the divine I that is always present. It begins with a pause, not the pause of the intellect, but the pause of the soul, the moment in which we withdraw attention from appearances, from the world of effects, from the rush of thoughts, and allow ourselves to sink inward, where the still, small voice makes itself known. This pause can happen anywhere, in the midst of work, in a moment of fear, during ordinary tasks, or in the quiet of meditation. The place does not matter, because the presence is not in place. It is in you, as you, expressing itself through you. Let us consider how this unfolds. You may be facing a challenge, perhaps a physical discomfort. The mind wants to rush forward, to name it, to claim it, to fear it. But in that very moment, you pause, you step back inwardly, and ask, gently, without effort, who is this I that is aware? You do not answer with words. You simply rest in the question, and slowly the awareness arises. The I that is aware is not the body. The I that is aware is not the sensation. The I that is aware is the I am the presence of God. In that recognition, even if it lasts only a moment, the fear loses its ground, because you have remembered that the divine self cannot be touched by changing conditions. Another moment, perhaps a sense of lack appears. The mind reacts. It plans, calculates, worries. But you pause, you withdraw from the picture, and you turn inward to the presence that has never lacked, never hungered, never been dependent on circumstances. You feel, not think, but feel the truth. I am is my supply, not the job, not the bank account, not the world. The I of me is the infinite source. And in that moment, you have practiced the presence. Practicing the presence is not about repeating phrases. It is about recognition, recognition of the one who lives you, recognition of the one who breathes you, recognition of the one who is your life. You may be washing the dishes, and you pause not outwardly, but inwardly and feel the invisible life that animates your being. That moment is practicing the presence. You may be walking down a street and suddenly become aware of the same presence within every person you pass. That recognition is practicing the presence. You may be burdened by a sense of responsibility, and in the quietness you perceive that the work is not yours, but God's expressing through you. That relinquishment is practicing the presence. This practice does not require time. It requires awareness It requires the willingness to step out of the belief that the human sense of self is the doer, the thinker, the chooser, the controller of life. As you develop this habit of turning inward, not as a ritual, but as a natural response, something begins to happen. You begin to sense an invisible companionship, an inner assurance, a presence that goes before you to prepare the way, that stands behind you as your protection, that lives within you as your sufficiency. This is not your imagination. This is not autosuggestion. This is the activity of the Christ, the I am, made tangible in consciousness. And as you rest more frequently in this awareness, you will discover that harmony begins to unfold without your personal striving. Problems dissolve without your intervention. Guidance comes without your seeking. Peace establishes itself as the atmosphere of your being. This is why Goldsmith said, "Do not try to make anything happen. Rest in the presence and let grace reveal what already is." Practicing the presence is not a means to an end. It is the end, because the goal of the spiritual life is not the improvement of human experience, but the realization of the I that is God. And it is in this practice that the false sense of self begins to grow quiet and the divine self begins to shine through. Until one day you may discover that you no longer turn inward to find the presence, you live from the presence. You no longer pause to remember truth. Truth becomes your abiding state. In our next movement, we will explore what life becomes when this presence is recognized in relationships, in work, in challenges, and in every corner of experience. As we continue in this unfolding, let us come again into the quiet realization that all spiritual progress is an expansion of consciousness. It is not something that happens to the outer world. It is something that happens within you, a dawning, a softening, a deepening awareness of the presence that has always been there. Practicing the presence prepares the ground. Living from the I am is the harvest. When the recognition of the I am begins to take root in consciousness, life itself undergoes a subtle but profound transformation. And this transformation does not begin with the outer picture, it begins with the end of fear. Fear arises only when we believe ourselves to be separate from God, separate from our good, separate from the source of life. But in the realization of the I am, this sense of separation dissolves, and with it the entire world built upon it. Let us look gently at how this unfolds. In daily experience, fear loses its authority. You may face a situation that once would have frightened you, a diagnosis, a financial concern, a relationship conflict. But now, something within you knows the I that I am is untouched by this. The I that I am cannot be threatened. The I that I am is the presence and power of God. You do not deny the appearance. You do not fight it. You simply no longer grant it identity. And as you stand in that recognition, fear loses its foundation. It cannot exist where there is no sense of separation. Goldsmith often said, "Fear disappears in the presence because there is nothing left to fear." This is not courage. This is not positive thinking. This is the natural peace that comes from knowing who you are. Lack cannot survive the awareness of infinite supply to the human mind. Supply seems to be in things, employment, investments, people, opportunities. But when you live from the I am, supply is recognized as spiritual substance, the infinite outflow of the divine presence. You no longer look outward for your good. You no longer fear the loss of channels. You no longer cling to form. You rest in the truth. The I of me is the fullness of supply, appearing wherever needed. And in this resting, you find that supply comes not through manipulation, not through effort, but by grace. One channel may close, yet three others open. One path may end, yet a better one appears. The outer flow reflects the inner recognition. Relationships become harmonious by identity, not effort. When you know the I am as yourself, something beautiful occurs. You begin to see the same I am in others. You are no longer relating to personalities, to histories, to wounds, to opinions. You are relating to the divine presence, expressing through individual forms. This shifts everything. Judgment softens. Conflict dissolves. Expectations fall away. Compassion becomes natural. You discover that harmony in relationship is not achieved by trying to change others, nor by trying to change yourself, but by seeing through the appearance to the truth of being, where there is recognition of the I am. Love flows without effort. Work becomes divine activity, not personal struggle. Living from the I am dissolves the belief that you are responsible for accomplishing life through human will. You begin to perceive that all rightful activity is God expressing through you. You do not initiate the work. You respond to the inner impulse. You do not struggle for results. You allow them. You do not worry about outcomes. You trust the divine intelligence that guides them. In this consciousness, work becomes joyful, effortless, harmonious. Ideas come without strain. Opportunities unfold without force. Everything begins to align with the rhythm of the presence. The sense of separation fades. Perhaps the greatest transformation of all is the quiet disappearance of the feeling of aloneness. When you live from the I am, you know, without needing proof, that you are never alone. You feel an invisible companionship, a presence that goes before you, walks with you, and lives as you. This is not imagination. This is the Christ appearing as your consciousness. In this awareness, you no longer look to the world for validation or security. You no longer depend upon outer forms to confirm your worth or your purpose. You rest in the realization, I and the Father are one. This is not a statement of belief. It is the felt truth of being. And from this truth, life becomes an expression of peace. Decisions become simpler, actions become inspired. Even challenges carry a different texture, for you no longer meet them as a frightened human self. You meet them as the presence itself. As this awareness stabilizes, you discover that the world has not changed, you have changed. You have awakened to the reality behind the world, and now the world must conform to the consciousness that beholds it. And so, my friends, living from the I am is not a mystical state reserved for the few. It is the natural state of all who recognize their true identity. It is the end of fear, the end of lack, the end of separation, because it is the end of the false sense of self. In our next and final movement, we will gather all of this into a closing recognition, a gentle return to the inner chamber where the I am stands, revealed as the only presence and power of your life. And now, my friends, let us return quietly, gently, to the place where all spiritual truth begins and ends within. Let us draw inward, as though we were entering the sacred chamber of the heart, where no noise of the world can intrude, where the concerns of the outer life fall silent, where only the presence remains. For everything we have spoken of, everything we have contemplated, Everything we have opened ourselves to in this journey has been pointing to one revelation, one secret, one living truth. The I of your being is God. The I am is your true identity. This truth is not to be believed. It is to be recognized. It is to be rested in. It is to be lived. There is nothing to acquire. There is nothing to become. There is nothing to achieve. The infinite presence that walked the hills of Galilee, the infinite life that animated the Master, the infinite light that he declared as the way, the truth, and the life. That very same presence is the I that looks through your eyes, breathes your breath, beats your heart, sustains your existence. You do not move toward God. You awaken to the truth that God is the one living you. You do not rise through levels of consciousness. You discover that consciousness has always been one. You do not travel a path to reach the divine. You remove the veils of false identity and behold the self that has never left you. This is the entire secret of spiritual life. The I am is already here, already whole, already complete, already expressing. And when you touch this truth, even for a moment, the shadows of fear lose their reality. The pressure of striving disappears. The burdens you once carried begin to dissolve, not because they have been solved, but because the one who carried them has disappeared. You are no longer the struggling self. You are no longer the anxious self. You are no longer the separate self. You are the I am, appearing as individual expression. Let us sit for just a moment in this awareness. No effort, no reaching, no seeking, simply abiding. Feel the silence, not the silence around you, but the silence within you. Feel the stillness, not the stillness of the room, but the stillness of the presence. Feel the life, not the life of the body, but the life that is eternal, infinite, incorruptible. In this stillness, you may sense what Goldsmith sensed, what the mystics have always sensed, that the presence is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. It is the very essence of your being. It is the self behind all selves, the light behind all forms, the life behind all appearances. And so we leave this time together as we began it, not as seekers, not as students, not as human beings trying to become spiritual, but as the very expression of the divine I, awakening to its own nature. Carry this awareness gently. Let it grow in the quiet moments. Let it speak in the pauses between thoughts. Let it guide without words, without commands, without effort. And as it does, you will discover that the journey is not forward, but inward, not upward, but deeper, not toward God, but into the realization, I am. Nothing more needs to be said. Nothing more needs to be done. Rest in this truth. Abide in this truth. Live from this truth. And the grace that goes before you will make all things new.